and thanks for joining us for another episode of Mid-American Gardener. I'm your host, Tanisha Spain, and joining me today with lots of show and tells and lots to talk about are two of our panelists who are here today with us. So Jennifer and Jennifer. So Jennifer Nelson, we'll start with you. Introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Nelson. I'm a horticulturalist, and you can find me online at groundedandgrowing.com. And I love to talk about all things horticulture, but my particular favorite things are vegetable gardening and houseplants.
Vegetables and houseplants. All right, Jennifer Fishburne, tell us about you.
Hey everyone, I'm Jennifer Fishburne. I work for the University of Illinois Extension as a horticulture educator, and I serve Logan, Menard, and Sangamon counties. I can talk about just about anything, but if you ask me what I'd like to talk about, it would be vegetables, herbs, and native plants.
And welcome back, Jennifer Fishburne. We haven't seen you in a while, and we know you've been crazy busy all summer long. So welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
That's a good thing, though, when you're busy, right? It means you're out teaching and doing all that
Yes.
kind of stuff. So awesome. Okay, so these ladies have teamed up and brought you a gang of things to talk about today. So Jennifer Nelson, we'll start with you. And the theme of today's show is sort of what's flowering now, things that are looking lovely in our yard, in our garden now. So what's the first couple of things you're going to talk about?
Well, I've made the decision to switch my planters over to fall annuals. And sometimes I do it a little earlier in the season, like around Labor Day, but all my stuff was looking really good. So I let it go a little longer. And it's starting to get where things are not looking as great. And we're starting to see more fall plants out in the nurseries. And so I picked up a couple things to show. These are pansies, probably very familiar to all the viewers. Available now. And then these are asters. And I think these are one plant that I think is really underutilized in fall gardens. We see everyone wants to plant mums, and everyone asks us if we've been asked once, we've been asked 1,000 times how to get mums to survive in the garden. But asters have really great flowering in and past the first frost, and they will look great into November in most cases. And a lot of them, even the ones that are sold as annuals, a lot of them still come back. They may not be really long-lived perennial, but there are some that are very long-lived. But even the annual ones around here, I've had good luck overwintering them a time or two. And so when you're selecting them, just like with mums, you would select ones that have some buds that are unopened so that you can enjoy it longer.
Okay, and tell us about the pansies. How long will you get to enjoy those with these cooler temperatures?
Last year mine went well into December. The pansies can withstand some light frost, and barring, a polar vortex out of left field, we should probably be okay into December with these. And you'll see them get frosty and frozen, and then as the weather warms up during the day, they just miraculously come back to life. And sometimes you can find ones that are called bounce back pansies or icicle pansies. There's a number of different names out there that are actually bred to bloom in the fall and overwinter and then bloom again in the spring. And they're generally only guaranteed to do that if they're planted in the ground. And so mine are in planters, and so I don't expect that to happen, because if they freeze solid in a pot, they're goners. But if you see those bounce back types, go ahead and try them. They can be really a nice thing to have popping up first thing in the spring.
And both of those are really pretty colors. I like that deep plum in the asters. Those were gorgeous. Okay. All right. Miss Fishburne, what did you bring us?
So I think we'll start with the yellows. I have two yellow native flowers. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Canada Gold, or this one here is Canada Goldenrod, but just talk about Goldenrod in general. So Canada Goldenrod is the one that we're seeing right now in all the fields along the roadsides. Pretty common. It can grow anywhere from 2 to 6 feet tall. Most of the ones in my area, my ground, are about my height, so about 5 feet tall or so. This one here is kind of a weedy. It is a native, but it's a very weedy native, as we call it. You see it in a large patches. So really recommend that if people are wanting to put this in a native flower bed or in their garden, that they pick a different selection. It's a stiff goldenrod. And if they want to get into cultivars, one of my favorite is called Fireworks. It's a very manageable plant, and it is just absolutely loaded with yellow blooms. It's a very, very gorgeous plant. So there are a lot of different cultivars out there. And I think what I'll remind folks of at this time is this is not the source of your hay fever or sneezing issues. This always gets blamed for people's allergies, but it is, in fact, is not. Typically at this time of year, it would be ragweed that people are having issues with. So don't blame the pretty flowers just because you see them. We blame it because we don't see ragweed in flower. It's a green flower, so not very conspicuous. So we're always blaming the goldenrod. So this is definitely one, not the Canada, but the cultivars and some of the other species. I would highly recommend this. It's a really beautiful, bright yellow color to add to your garden. So keep that in mind. Likes full sun, will bloom anywhere. Your goldenrods will bloom from August through September. So here's another one. I think it's got kind of a fun name, and no, it doesn't cause you to sneeze. That's it's got its name, but this is called Sneezeweed.
Pretty.
See here, it has a really pretty yellow petals with a big little ball here in the center. So it's actually very attractive. And this is just one stem. And if you can see that, how many blossoms, blooms we see just on one stem, I think it's absolutely gorgeous. Again, something that pops nicely in the landscape. Again, this one likes full sun, could grow in part shade, gets about 4 feet tall. Probably best if you put it behind something that'll kind of prop it up a little bit. Mine got smushed over from my Baptisia that got a little carried away. So it's trying to peek out from underneath of it. But this one again will bloom August to September. Another beautiful yellow flower, makes a great addition to your native beds or your regular flower beds.
Those are gorgeous, and they would look really pretty along the goldenrod.
Yes.
I think it's hilarious that we're working on the reputation of the goldenrod because it's unfairly blamed for allergies. I'm a ragweed sufferer, so I know what it looks like, but you're right, a lot of people don't see it. And but it's funny, we got to set the record straight so goldenrod can have a better reputation on the streets. Thank you. Okay, we're going to go back to Jennifer Nelson with your next batch.
Okay, my next batch is kind of in the vegetable garden turned into an ornamental garden. So one thing that I have had really great luck with is planting kale in the fall garden. And this is an ornamental kale. And so this one is called Yokohama Red. And it doesn't look all that red now, but once the cooler nights set in, especially those light frosty nights, the center leaves will turn a bright, they call it red, but it's more like purple to me. And it will really color up really nicely. And this is, I'm planning on putting this in about a 14-inch pot. It'll fill the pot easily, and it'll be, people will stop and ask me what it is because it will be very eye-catching. And Jennifer and I were talking about this, and this is actually edible. It's beautiful, but you could eat it too if you wanted to. So like I picked up, this is another version that's going to be white in the center. So once we get the cooler temperatures, the center of the leaves will be a white creamy color. And I also shopped in the just the regular vegetable section, and I found this is another kind of kale. They call it lancenato, and you can see one of the problems with late season vegetables like the kales and things like broccoli and all related are insect damage. So clearly they were growing these out for fall sale, but the late season insects got to it. But we'll spray it with some insecticidal soap, and I'll plant it out in my containers, and within a few weeks you won't notice it. But this is also called dinosaur kale because it's got kind of this bumpy texture like dinosaur skin. And this is one that is actually a totally an edible plant, but I found it in the ornamental section. So this is Swiss Chard Bright Lights. And you can see that there's multiple colors within the same pot, different plants, but there's like the petiole, this is part of the leaf. So some of them are this bright pink, we've got some orange and a bright yellow and a bright white. And so this is going to look really great in a pot on my porch, and I'll be able to eat it too. So it'll serve form and function.
Very cool. I like how you're incorporating the food into the decor. Now, with the kale, will you kind of just snack on that throughout the season? Is that a cut and come again
It
plant?
would be one that instead of like cutting off the whole thing, because that would just remove my colorful display, I would maybe take some outer leaves.
Mm,
So still cut and come again, but a little bit modified version, just cutting along the edges.
just to keep it, pretty, but also being
Yeah,
able to enjoy
yeah.
it.
And
Very
those
cool.
will go well into December. I had never grown those until about 10 years ago, and I grew a few, and it's pretty impressive how long they'll go in the season.
So what flowers have you taken out to make way for your new fall things? What did you, what was,
I'm gonna take out all of my summer flowers, at least I've got the calibrachoa and the geraniums. I may try to overwinter the geraniums in the garage, but I'm gonna just clear it out and start fresh. Because
yeah.
they're so overgrown right now, and their roots have totally filled the pots. I'm to a point where I have to the water is just, it's hard to keep up with the watering at this point.
Mhm. Mine just look tired, you know.
Yeah, and they just look tired. I think we're all kind of tired, so we need
We
to
are. We
freshen it
are.
up.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. All right, Jennifer Fishburne, we're back to you.
Thanks. One thing I'll add to the Swiss chard conversation is Swiss chard is a great one actually to plant early spring, and it will actually grow all summer long. It makes, I think, a great vegetable plant that combines very nicely into an ornamental landscape. You can plant it just about anywhere because of those bright colors. Just keep those leaves picked off, even if you're not going to eat them, the older leaves, and then it'll just keep going all summer long into fall. So it's one of those very few plants that can tolerate a couple vegetables that can tolerate warm and cool.
Mm-hmm.
So what do I have next? This is pineapple sage. This is actually, here we go. This is actually an annual in our area. It is something you could try to overwinter, maybe indoors. It's not real cold tolerant here, but this one is just now coming into bloom for me. So it's one of those sit and wait kind of annuals where you buy it and you just sit and wait. The plant is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But it usually takes it a while for the flowers to come on. So mine are actually just now coming on, and I had to fight with the hummingbirds to pick this flower because they dearly love this plant. The bright red colors and then the long throated flowers are very attractive to hummingbirds and a lot of our pollinating insects. So where does this get its name? Pineapple sage. You actually can use this in cooking the leaves. But it gets its name from the fragrance. So if you could smell it, it would have a pineapple-y fragrance. This is when I grow it in a container, but you could grow it in the ground. It'll grow every bit of 2.5 feet and the same type of a spread. So very, very colorful, but again, you got to kind of sit and wait a little bit. But the leaves are very attractive as well. And this is one of those plants, as Jennifer mentioned, it's in a container, and yes, it needs watered every single day because it's, even though it's in a really big pot, it's getting pretty root bound. So
Are the flowers fragrant for us?
they're not actually, at least I can't smell anything. No, but the foliage is. So if you brush
Gotcha.
the foliage, you'll get a nice fragrance.
Nice. Very nice.
So not necessarily to go along with it. Maybe it's just the same color hue. I don't know. This is a blue sage. This is native. As mentioned before with the sneezeweed and the goldenrod, those are also native, and they're also great pollinator plants. So all of the ones I'm going to show are very pollinator friendly. And last night or yesterday when I was out looking at this plant, I saw butterflies on it and all kinds of assorted bees. And then last night when I went out to pick the flowers, there were actually moths on it. So you'll see pollinators on it day and night almost. This is one of the plants, though, that you got to kind of have the right spot for it because it'll grow about 5 feet tall. But you can see from the foliage, it's what I call kind of a wispy, airy plant. So it's not a very dense plant. It looks really good combined with grasses, and grasses will actually help this plant stand up. It can tend to flop a little bit. So putting it near a grass will help keep it a little bit more upright. But there are very few plants that are going to give us this flower color. So this is a really pretty August through October blooming plant. And you can see this one's about spent. So I would say it's going to be an August, September bloomer. It's going to be spent by that time. And what I did notice, it doesn't bother me in the flower bed I have it in, but this one I did notice a few volunteers coming up and blooming in my flower bed. So with some of your natives, if you don't want volunteer plants, make sure that when they're finished blooming to cut those seed heads off so those seeds don't shatter to the ground. So this one is coming up, but again, it doesn't bother me. It's just what I call a free plant. So I'll just move it to a new and give it a new home.
That's right. We love those free plants. Just pluck it right out and put it where you want it. Awesome.
That's right.
Oh, thank you. All right. Jennifer, do you have more show and tells?
Yeah, I've got one more.
Awesome. Awesome. Let's see
So
it.
this is a Japanese anemone that I actually got from Jennifer some years ago. So any of those free plants of that sage you were just showing, any of them can come over to my house, Jennifer. I won't mind. But I got this from Jennifer some years ago. And it's one of those plants that I dearly love because it blooms so late in the season. It doesn't start blooming until like state fair time, so about August. And it looks really great right now while everything else is kind of petering out. And like Jennifer said, so many pollinators enjoy flowers that are coming up now because there's so few things that are blooming now. So this is the one that I would highly recommend. It took a little while to get established, but once it's established, it's got this nice airy sort of flower structure. I love how it looks.
That's really pretty. Everything you guys have shown so far would look really pretty in like a cut arrangement. Like it all looks like it kind of goes together. Okay. Jennifer, did you have any other show and tell?
I do have another one. And actually, before this show started, all of mine were in a vase with
Nice.
arrangement. So not really well organized, but Prairie drop seed. This is a grass, and believe it or not, this is the most fragrant flower that I have shown you today. This one actually has a fragrance, believe it or not. It's kind of, a lot of people don't think of grasses as being fragrant, but this one is. And you either really like the smell or you don't. I really enjoy it. This to me smells a little bit like buttered popcorn. Some people smells more like cilantro. But it is very fragrant. And when it's in bloom, particularly here at our office, it's not very far from the door. You get that waft of smell with a breeze. And I just think it's very nice. But this is a plant that'll get about 2 feet by, it says 2 to 3 feet tall. Ours right now are around 3 feet tall with the flower. The grass itself is actually a very thin blade of grass. So it's more like a 2 foot mound, but it stays pretty much in its place, and it just looks wonderful all season long, but particularly now when it's in bloom.
Very pretty. And I wouldn't mind the buttered popcorn smell at all. Not one bit.
You
all
start craving butter popcorn when you smell it all the time walking in and out.
I am right now. I'm hungry, so yeah.
So how did Jennifer Nelson, we'll start with you. How did now that we're in mid to late September, how did your garden do this summer? We had some wacky weather. We had wet, we had dry, we had hot. How did things perform?
I ended up drowning in cucumbers for a while. We did get a healthy amount of tomatoes. Some of my tomatoes didn't do very well, and I'm not entirely sure why. I think I'm going to blame the weather because I put them in containers, which I have used for years at this point and really loved how my tomatoes have done, and they just never really took off. And I'm not exactly sure what was happening there. And I don't know, it's probably some user error too, but my tomatoes in the ground did a lot better, but they were a lot later than what would be usual. And I didn't get them in particularly late. So not exactly sure there. My sunflowers did fantastic once they got going.
Cool. All right. Jennifer Fishman, what about you? How did things perform at your house?
Well, they could have done a lot better. Actually, my tomatoes did better this year than they have the last couple of years. I do have a few in containers on my deck, but I also have some in the ground, and both have done really well for me. Even though we've had all this, a lot of moisture, it typically lends to more disease problems. Mine have been doing fairly well. So I've been pleased with that. Other plants, though, my squash plants, my cucumber plants, and my green beans succumbed to insect damage. So vegetables are one of those things, honestly, where if you're going to grow them to get really good crops, you do have to use some insecticide on them. And I just did not get it on at the right times and just didn't get to it. So they won. the insects won, but you got to feed everybody, I suppose. But I'll just mention at this time, as people are out in their gardens, do assess what worked and what didn't, and log that somewhere, maybe on a calendar. Maybe you can put an app on your phone, but do pay attention to that, because next April you're not going to remember what you saw today. That's pretty critical. The other thing would be, I know that my garden didn't do well and hasn't done well for a few years because I have low fertility. So fall would be a great time to get some aged manure on there, some compost, chop up those leaves that you're going to rake up or mow, chop those up really fine and put those on your garden for some added nutrients. All of that can be really helpful, and that's something you can do yet this fall that would be great for your garden.
Great advice. Great advice. And that kind of leads into the question I'm going to ask you, Jennifer. This is number 78. Julie Walters writes in, do any of your master gardeners have information about using cover crops on a vegetable garden? I'm entertaining the thought for this fall, and I don't know if it's a good or a bad idea. Would really appreciate their input. By the way, especially love the show on identifying weeds. That was a fun show earlier this summer. So Jennifer Nelson and both of you can weigh in here. We've got about 5 minutes left. Cover crop ideas and whether or not you think it's a good idea.
I will say it's an excellent idea, and we have done this some years ago when I worked with Extension. We had a garden at WA&D out in Decatur, and we used two different winter cover crops, winter wheat and winter rye, and those were both things that we planted usually around November, even as late as Thanksgiving. And they will grow in the cool weather. And you don't want them to grow a ton before winter sets in. You want them to just sprout and kind of establish. And then in the spring, when they start to grow again, you want to till them under when they're a few inches tall. If they get really tall, they'll get tangled up in the tiller. So you would want to mow them off first. But it's basically what you call a green manure. So you're going to turn it over in the spring and then let that decompose for a while before you plant. And it did phenomenal things. For what we started out with was a almost straight sandy soil. And it took 5 or 6 years to build it up, but we really added the organic matter in the soil and improved it tremendously. We were following it with soil tests all along.
Okay, wonderful. Jennifer Fishburne, anything to add there?
No, I would agree. I have tried the winter rye on my garden. And again, you want it to come up, but you don't want it to get very tall, just as Jennifer said. The other thing would be is just in a normal cover crop situation, normal being a farm situation, they have crimpers where it's able to break the plant, lay it over, and then they plant right into it. It's kind of difficult to do that on a home garden situation because you don't have necessarily the tools to do that. So as Jennifer mentioned, mowing and then maybe lightly tilling it in, or mowing it super short so it ceases that growth, then you could plant into it as well.
Awesome. Okay, we got time for one more question. Let's do number 88. This is from Jen Baker. She writes in, we noticed a couple of weeks ago that our green and white hostas were looking very beraggled. Our other green and blue hostas seem to be doing fine, and they're right next to them. Also have noticed in some of our neighbors' yards that the green and white ones look bad also. They're not in the sun and get the same amount of water as the solid one. Could this be a virus? Do they want to ignore the problem, cut them to the ground, or dig them out? So what are your thoughts here on what's going on with their hostas?
So at this time of year, we do see a lot of hostas starting to look very tired. It's okay for the plant. They've done all their photosynthesis through the summer. So the plant normally will be just fine. One of the photos that I did see showed that the ground was very dry, and hostas do like a little bit of moisture. They like to be on that little bit damper side maybe, but they do not like to be bone dry. When they get that way, they tend to shed their leaves because they're trying to keep that root system growing. So they may lose a few leaves that way. It's possible it could be other issues as well, but moisture does play a good part on hostas, particularly at this time of year, and particularly if you have them planted near tree roots. They'll not be able to retain as much moisture for the plant.
And this late in the season, like you said, things are starting to look sort of tired. So it's probably not out of the ordinary. Nothing to maybe worry about.
No.
All right. Last question. This is number 83. This is from Mary Dickinson, and she writes in, I have several succulent plants that are showing brown spots on the leaves. Some are flat, others are a bit raised. What do you think is causing this? Usually err on the side of underwatering. And both of
So
you can feel free on this one, what your thoughts are. Go ahead, Jennifer.
I think there's a couple different potential problems here. She doesn't say where she has these, and if they've been inside and then she put them outside, it can be a symptom of sunburn to have the brown spots on the leaves. It can also be a symptom of having something having injured that leaf at some point. So whether it was an insect or if you're outside, all bets are off. If you're outside, there can be all sorts of sources of injuries, slugs and snails and even rabbits, also, or all your usual houseplant pests. So anytime there's an injury, if she is happening to overwater, she says she's underwatering, but you can also get some fungal spots that look like brown spots on succulents. But those are just some ideas I had. She'd have to really look at how they've been, where they've been, and what the conditions they've been subject to.
Got it. Okay. That's it. We're out of time. Thank you guys so much for bringing all of those show and tells. That was a really great show. Lots of the theme today was what's blooming currently, and I really like that. You guys did a great job collaborating. So thanks for you, and thanks to you for joining us. If you have a question, you can send it in to yourgarden@gmail.com, or just look us up on Facebook. Just search Mid-American Gardener, and we'll see you next time. Good night.